Vladimir Putin bribed Donald Trump by promising his family and closest associates shares in the largest Russian energy companies. And not only that, the President of the United States may force Ukraine to make devastating concessions in negotiations by June in order to secure major business deals with the Russian Federation. The Kremlin promised the United States investment opportunities worth up to $12 trillion in exchange for lifting sanctions. And according to sources from The Economist, the terms of such a deal may have been agreed upon in advance, but it is not just about business deals between the two countries. As it became known during negotiations on ending the war in Ukraine, the Kremlin offered people close to the family of President Donald shares in Russian energy assets and seats on the board in exchange for lifting American sanctions. In particular, trusted heads of the White House may join projects for oil and gas extraction in the Arctic, development of rare earth metal deposits, creation of a data processing center with nuclear power supply, and construction of a tunnel under the Bering Strait. In all these projects, people close to Trump can receive their share if they force Ukraine to capitulate. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and write any comment you like. If you consider our work important and necessary, you can support this YouTube channel financially with your donation or a paid subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. I will be grateful for any support you can give. So, sources from The Economist have stated that America is simultaneously conducting two different tracks of negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. Negotiations with Russia, led by the United States, have resulted in numerous proposals, but have not reached an agreement on territorial issues or security guarantees. Meanwhile, other representatives from the Kremlin and the White House were discussing, let's say, business matters. Volodymyr Zelensky, citing Ukrainian intelligence, claims that Russia promised America deals worth $12 trillion in exchange for lifting sanctions. And here are the sources from The Economist. The White House believes that the package between the United States and Russia has already been agreed upon. In Europe, there are growing concerns that President Donald Trump may force Ukraine to make serious concessions by June in order to get money from the Kremlin. Here is the quote. The promise of enrichment is at the core of Vladimir Putin's strategy. As The Economist has learned, before the meeting between the Russian president and Donald Trump in August, a memo was prepared for Russia's National Security Council explaining how to sell Donald Trump the greatest deal. Since April of last year, Kirill Dmitriev, the manager of the Russian State Fund, met with Steven Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, at least 9 times. People close to the Trump family are negotiating to acquire shares in Russian energy assets. The United States was offered deals involving Arctic oil and gas, rare earth element mines, a nuclear-powered data center, and a tunnel under the Bering Strait. Russia is suffering from low oil prices and tightening sanctions. The President of the United States wants to achieve results before the midterm elections in November. But I should note right away that the figure of $12 trillion is clearly an exaggeration. And here The Economist writes that the available wealth is only a small part of what the Kremlin advertises. But China is already ahead of America in the race for these prizes. Here The Economist immediately writes that American companies may return to the Russian market after the sanctions are lifted, but they can expect very limited sales volumes. Western companies were earning less in Russia even before the full-scale war than, for example, in Italy. According to estimates by the Kenyan Stock Exchange, in 2021, the total annual profit of 1,500 foreign companies operating in Russia at that time amounted to only $18 billion, with revenues of about $300 billion. That's why what concerns Donald Trump's envoys the most is the potential opportunity to participate in mega projects capable of transforming global commodity markets. The document from the Russian National Security Council describes, and I quote, the treasure trove of Arctic and northern resources that a dozen sovereign and private funds from the United States and other hostile countries will rush to exploit. Everyone will make a lot of money, and that's why Presidents Putin and Trump could potentially receive Nobel Prizes. And this is where the full magnitude of unwashed Russia is revealed. Most Russian oil fields are old and significantly depleted. To maintain production, Russia needs a huge influx of foreign money and technology, labor, and of course, capital. This could contribute, for example, to a shale revolution in western Siberia. The Arctic part of Russia also has great untapped potential for oil and gas. With sufficient investment and an oil price of around $100 per barrel, the region could yield almost 50 billion barrels of oil. A key element of these ambitions is the Vostok project, implemented by Russia's largest energy company, Rosneft. Its implementation will require 15 new cities, 3 airports, and 3,500 kilometers of power lines, and the estimated cost of the project is billions of dollars. Moreover, it is believed that there are 29 million tons of rare earth elements in Russia's far north, which is equivalent to 74 years of global production. To develop them, Russia is exploring the Angara-Yenisei Valley. This is a Siberian processing center worth $9 billion, which, by the way, is managed by Sergei Shoigu. Russia hopes that creating a special power transmission line, an economic zone, new infrastructure connections, and tax incentives will increase its share in global rare earth element production from the current 1.3% to 10% by 2030. This may include heavy rare earth elements, which are the rarest and most valuable. Well, Trump needs these elements to stop relying on the Chinese ones. But to implement all these projects, the wild Russians have neither money nor technology nor, most importantly, brains. And that's why Moscow decided, just like in the good old days, those who studied the Soviet Union or maybe even lived in it know this. Moscow decided to bribe Donald Trump and essentially try to develop its extraction industry using money and technology from the hated West. And now Putin is trying to personally bribe Donald Trump with all of this. Supposedly, the Kremlin is even ready to give shares in major companies to Trump's inner circle, just so that America would help the savages develop these deposits. But lifting sanctions from the Russian economy is not an easy task. Western countries as a whole have imposed almost 23,000 sanctions against Russia in recent years. Some of them can be lifted, but lifting many others, including sanctions against most banks and energy projects, will require consultations with Congress, which includes many hardliners on Russia. Intelligence agents and diplomats now believe that Europe will be extremely reluctant to lift its own sanctions. But history shows that lingering uncertainty even after sanctions are lifted will deter multinational corporations from unwashed Russia. For context, very few companies returned to Iran after, for example, the suspension of key sanctions in 2016. Even though the American and European governments told companies that it was safe to return and so on. They didn't return, and as we can see, they weren't wrong. But there's something else. Even before the war, foreign companies in Russia often found themselves on the verge of politically motivated punishment and persecution, and now the situation is even more complicated. And next, I'll quote The Economist. A peace agreement that leaves Ukraine demoralized and defenseless will encourage Vladimir Putin to launch a new invasion. And that would mean the return of sanctions, the reinstatement of capital controls, and the military-industrial complex pushing out other sectors of the economy. Western companies will return to square one or even find themselves in a worse position. Another complication is that many of the niches left by Western companies in 2022 have since been filled by firms from Asia, Turkey, and other regions. In 2024, China accounted for 57% of Russia's goods imports compared to 23% before the war. Russia is also flooded with parallel imports of Western goods, illegally resold from Gulf countries or China, which undermines the position of new sellers in the field of science and technology. The Russian government is calling for greater autonomy, not openness. Therefore, it seems that making a mega deal will be extremely difficult, but nevertheless, this does not mean that all negotiations have stopped. No, people close to the White House can make lucrative deals. For example, a source from the White House has already stated that Trump's team has already discussed with Kremlin envoys seats on the boards of Russian companies. In addition, there is active discussion about how exactly to create the appearance of American control over major projects if Europe refuses to release the funds. And instead of a conclusion, I'll quote The Economist. If the White House takes the bait, the rest of America will be waiting in vain for unexpected benefits, since the political costs will keep rising. The hawks in Congress would be horrified if a newly opened Russia started rewarding its allies, especially China. An increase in trade, finance, and investment would soon allow the Russian economy to recover, paving the way for the next war. Any president who cares about America's interests would take a hard look at Putin's $12 trillion offer and turn it down. Putin. At the end of this episode, I want to make a recommendation for the male audience of my channel. Many have already breathed a sigh of relief after February 14th, but March 8th is still ahead, so get ready. Often we men approach a surprise or a gift for a woman as if we're solving a political issue. We fill our heads with goals, budgets, logistics, KPIs, and so on. So we expect some wild excitement from the woman, and when she just says a simple thank you, we even start to shake. I mean, I tried so hard. Where's the excitement? And then I watched a video by a psychologist where she actually explains why our efforts only make things worse, and she explains how to do it better. So, if you don't want to work another shift on March 8th without any results, make sure to check out this analysis. For me, as someone who cares about making sure my efforts always get a real response and not just a polite nod, it was super helpful to watch this analysis. As usual, I'm leaving the link to the video in the description and in the pinned comment. I recommend you go and watch it. It's just 10 minutes of your time, and as they say, the holiday is saved. And by the way, the female audience will also find it interesting to watch. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link is in the description. Leave a like and hit the bell if you want to support the work of this channel. All the links are also in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.